in Spanish on our Zoom channel, please register on our social media networks. Instructions on how to register for Spanish interpretation are being shown right now. En breve comenzaremos nuestro evento. Si quieres registrarte para escuchar este evento en español en nuestro canal de Zoom, haga clic de registro en nuestras redes sociales. Las instrucciones sobre cómo registrarse para la interpretación en español se están mostrando ahora mismo. Good afternoon. My name is Rodrigo Stein, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our La Clínica Talks speaker series. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This is a live event with simultaneous interpretation on our Zoom channel. As such, we remind our guests to speak slowly. That way, our full audience will benefit from what you have to say. We'll have a space for Q&A, so we encourage audience members to enter your questions in the chat at any point during the program. La Clínica Talks is a space devoted to promoting healthcare as a human right for immigrant communities in the DMV. By engaging with elected officials, we bridge a gap and illuminate the barriers and challenges, as well as opportunities and solutions for our community members to access healthcare and other essential services. It is our hope that this space can bring a unique perspective on what immigrant health equity means and the steps needed to advance it. Today's conversation focuses on three key themes: examining how public health can be used as a lens to promote public safety, the importance of language access and language justice in building healthier communities, and legislative actions we need to take to advance immigrant health equity in the district. With that in mind, I would like to welcome our featured guest, Ward 4 Councilmember Janeese Lewis-George, a third-generation Washingtonian, experienced attorney, and community advocate. Janeese represents over 900 of La Clínica's patients who reside in Ward 4. Joining Janeese is La Clínica del Pueblo's Executive Director, Catalina Sol. Catalina has over 25 years of public health and direct service provision with marginalized communities and Latino immigrants. Catalina has developed multiple programs and initiatives for La Clínica. Please join me in welcoming Janeese and Catalina.
Thank you. Welcome, Council Member.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Council Member. So I'd like to begin the conversation with just a very brief question. And Council Member, over 900 clients who receive services at La Clínica reside in Ward 4. Can you share your overall vision for Ward 4 with our extended La Clínica community, including those viewing the live stream right now?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here with the La Clínica community. I took office in January, and so coming in January, we've been focusing on setting up our office, building community connections, delivering on constituent services, and beginning to work on the legislation that will make a difference in the lives of our constituents. I'm really proud that Ward 4 is home to so many immigrants, DC residents, and several of my priorities are specifically about supporting those residents, including expanding language access so that our really important programs like vaccine registration, unemployment, rental assistance are accessible for all DC residents, regardless of what language they speak. It also includes supporting excluded workers in DC, many of whom have been out of work for months, but cannot access unemployment benefits. It also includes improving DC Healthcare Alliance so that residents don't have to go in person every 6 months to keep their health coverage. And I'm also a strong supporter of immigration legal services and making sure that DC residents have legal support to adjust their immigration status, renew their TPS and DACA, apply for citizenship, and prevent deportation and more. And that is a vision that I have for our goals. Really, I want Ward 4 to be a place where everyone feels they are at home. I know we say that DC is a sanctuary city, but I want people to really feel that Ward 4 is a sanctuary neighborhood, a sanctuary community where everyone can afford to live, everyone can get a quality job and get fair wages, where everyone can feel safe in their home and feel safe in our community. And our children have access to all of the services and education they need.
Thank you very much, Council Member. It's very encouraging to hear such vision of inclusivity and really support for our community, which brings me to Catalina. So maybe Catalina, can you share who are these 900 clients who receive services at La Clínica who also reside in Ward 4?
Yes, and I'd also maybe like to start by just really reinforcing what a silver lining this pandemic has brought us in being able to have this kind of dialogue with you, Councilmember, and with others that we typically wouldn't have such an easy opportunity to be able to really develop our partnerships and our alliance and to extend this kind of dialogue to more people in our community. You know, I think that we, and as I'm sure many of your colleagues and certainly our sister agencies were just dismayed in the early days of the pandemic and how we would pivot quickly to reach so many people that we knew would just typically show up, you know, at our doors, at our sites, and who relied on that face-to-face personal group to be able to just navigate the system and their rights and their access. And this social media work, which I think was definitely familiar for some parts of our community, but not as many as now have been involved, have really, you know, just created so many opportunities for us to hope to deepen this dialogue. And I hope that for me, it's a new medium, you know, I have to admit, and getting comfortable with it. And I certainly hope that post-pandemic, this closeness within the distance is something that we can continue to maintain,
Absolutely.
You know, looking forward. I've been, you know, the 25 years keep growing, right? I don't really want to go past that, but I've been with La Clínica since the late 90s. And when I joined La Clínica, we had just purchased the building that we have in Columbia Heights in front of All Souls Church. And it took us about 5 years to move there because even though La Clínica is pretty tame, there was still a not in my backyard kind of concern about parking, about what our clients were going to be doing. And it took us a little while. And I remember then in 2003, wondering if our community was still going to be around, right? In that site, because that change in the city and I know that you as a native Washingtonian must feel that you're walking on top of layers and layers of what was there before, you know. Are we still in the place where our community is going to be, you know? And now, how many years have we been in that building? If I do the math, every time that we run our reports, we still see 2009, 2010, 2011 as the zip codes that are the majority zip codes for La Clínica. So our community is most definitely hanging on, right? And I think that, you know, that 20% of our patient population that lives in Ward 4, they're far more than the individual numbers, because you know, roughly we say that for every person that lives in a location that appears in our zip code list, there's 10 more, right, other connected to them in terms of family, neighbors, colleagues, or our reach is much higher. But I do think that the characteristics of our patients in Ward 4 continue to be primarily a low income, below the 200% of the poverty level. At least 30% of our patients, and really the majority of district residents in our patient population have health insurance access through the DC Alliance,
Right.
which is a forward, ahead of the nation program, that I'm very proud of, but now has fallen behind in terms of how it compares to Medicaid and other low-income programs for the city. Our Alliance patients don't have access to mental health. They can access many programs
That's a huge issue.
but in a more fragmented way, So, and certainly, just the struggle to make ends meet without being beneficiaries of many of the federal safety net programs. You know the story, right? 2 or 3 jobs, having to support families here, families in our countries of origin, navigating the extreme distress of the last 4 years of anti-immigrant national policy, and really trying to figure out, can we continue to live in the district with its progressive policies, our home, and all of these access to services while housing continues to be a problem? Can we continue to benefit from all of the things that the city has, quote, turned around? Will they also benefit us? So I feel great hope for this time, and having leaders like you be on that place where we can make decisions that really benefit the city. But I also think that there's no easy solutions to many of the challenges that we face. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how you're thinking about approaching it and helping you, as best as we can.
Yeah. And I will say, I absolutely stand with La Clinica and the many other organizations who have, speaking of the DC Healthcare Alliance, have been advocating to eliminate that 6-month recertification requirement. It's not realistic or respect a day off work, find childcare, and then wait in long lines twice a year just to keep their parents' health insurance. And Alliance services some of our most vulnerable residents. We should keep doing everything we can to make sure people are going to keep their coverage and not push them out. And so, one of the very first votes as council member was in support of eliminating the DC Healthcare Alliance 6-month recertification. And I also included this in my budget priorities letter to the mayor, and I'm looking forward to working with my fellow council members to include it in the budget for the fiscal year. But one of the areas that you just mentioned that are really passionate about, and that's that mental health piece. I absolutely believe we need to expand Alliance to include services like mental health. I think there has never been a more obvious than it is now in the midst of this pandemic when so many are struggling, how and why mental health services are so critical and so important for our communities.
Well, we're really happy to hear that. And of course, we've been a part of the Alliance Coalition, which has been led, really by a number of different agencies. And now Legal Aid is convening, DC Fiscal Policy Institute. We've been a convener, and it's just a really beautiful coalition, I think, right, of the different agencies. And we are also hoping to be able to really request that the mayor take a good hard look at the budget now that there's an opportunity, right, with all of the additional funding that's coming to really make good on, the restrictions that can be permanently lifted, and then really establishing that as a floor. Like we're not done there. That's just the minimal that we have to do to be able to make the Alliance program accessible so that we can increase its benefits and its coverage in an easy way, right? Without having to go to, as a provider, the way that we make things work for our patients is that sometimes we have to enroll in 2 or 3 different funding streams or 2 or 3 different regulatory agencies that provide different parts of the whole human being's health, and that it just basically cuts down on the resources that we have to be able to just offer the services. So what do you think has gotten in the way of that change? I feel like we've had real support from Councilmember Nadeau, Councilmember Gray. I've been a part of those council hearings for many years, and it seems like we're all nodding in agreement, and the dollars, they're in the system, so I'm wondering from your perspective as an outsider insider now, what do you think we need to do to change things this time around, given the opportunity?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I think need to change really are, now that I'm on the inside, is really making sure that not only our voices being heard, on, some of the legislative issues, but really in this upcoming area, in this upcoming budget process, right? So we do get some really good legislation from council members on a number of issues, just like the recent, legislation with the 6 month certification. But really, we know as as a service provider, that if you don't have enough funds to do the providing of services, it just doesn't happen. So I think this area is where it's most critical for us to make sure that we put our money where our mouths are, right? We've gotten a lot of yeses and a lot of, in the situation. So I think it's just going to be critical right now for us to ensure that we are zeroed and engaged in the budget process. And I think the other piece of that is, unfortunately, immigrants haven't always been treated as a priority in the district. And so far too long, we allowed the system to treat people in a way that wouldn't have been accessible for most of our residents. And there was a lack of dignity in how this program was administered. And so I also have hope because of the incredible organizing and advocacy that have been happening in the recent years, in part in response to the terrible, Trump administration and all these issues. We're seeing the needle move on those issues that that were static for years. And that's something that's happening because the community is organizing, alliances are happening, advocacy is at work. And I think that's really, as we're seeing, is making sure that those things are happening in how we do things, that we should not be an afterthought, but a forethought. And especially when we throw the word equity around so much in this city. But we don't define it, and we don't demand our elected officials to define it, and we don't demand that not only do they define it, that they also show it in how we allocate our funding and how we choose who gets to be providers of funding to the community. So that's what I'm seeing on the inside here as to what further work we need to do to make sure Latinica clients and organizations and alliances are not only heard, but get some effective action.
So, thank you, Councilmember. And it's very encouraging to approach equity as well in a critical lens and not just throw it as a buzzword, but really, one of the barriers our community faces is to be more active in participation is the issue of language and language access in service centers, as well as a means to be more active in civic engagement and initiatives. For example, just to give you a small example, just in order for us to have this conversation and make it accessible for our constituents, we have a team of 4 people managing our Zoom. So how are we more intentional of including interpretation services and facilitating language access, including in our budget? So just
awesome. This is an area actually where I want your help, and I'm going to talk about what I'm doing right now, and then want to talk about how I would love for you all to join me in the request that I am making. So I've been incredibly disappointed that DC government has not been providing true language access, especially for programs as essential as our vaccine portal, our rental assistance, our unemployment benefits, and more. And it shouldn't take advocacy, news stories, and hearings to do what our laws already require, right? Our Language Access Act already requires this. And so this is an issue I've been committed to working on as a council member and leading on, and as a council member who represents many residents who speak Spanish, Amharic, French, and other languages depend on these resources to make it through the pandemic. So I brought up language access repeatedly in oversight hearings for agencies that were missing the mark and raise it on our calls with the executive. Now I'm asking that we make this a budget priority too, and I'm asking you to join me in that. The Language Access Act was passed in 2004 and then amended in 2018, but it still hasn't been fully funded. We can give it teeth, right? And the way that we give it teeth, meaning that we actually hold people to it, is by funding 3 full-time employees at the Office of Human Rights to monitor enforcement, to take complaints, and to make sure these things are happening. So one of my budget asks to the mayor and to the Mendelson is to fully fund the Language Access Act by giving us by the Office of Human Rights taking on employees to manage that process to make sure it's happening. I'm also interested in this moment where we're getting federal dollars. I'm also interested in exploring how we can use the massive amount of federal funds for DC to overhaul our language access practices across DC government. So that would mean that every agency and every program is consistently producing materials in all of DC's frequently spoken language. So right now we see during COVID, we talked about Department of Employment Services, we talked about the vaccine portal and rental assistance. What's happening is they may have the front page in one of our 5 languages, but then when the individuals receive emails back, they're not in that same language. So there has to be a technology overhaul in all of our agencies to meet the needs of the Language Access Act. And so I'm asking you to join me in requesting that federal dollars are used to overhaul language access practices in DC and give us a real robust practice, especially in our human services agencies and practices. And so those are the 2 ways I think we need to improve this for the district. And those are the 2 ways I'm going to ask you to put that in your letter to the mayor and to the council, and to include that in further requests to my fellow council members.
But I think that's music to our ears, right? Because we really fundamentally understand that there's really very little that you can do if communication is not enabled through language access in multiple ways, in quality ways, and in consistent ways, and it has to be bidirectional, or as it has to be available.
Mm-hmm.
Catalina,
I think you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. See what I said about the medium. But I think that this is very interesting, because this is not reinventing the wheel, right? This is a really reinforcing standards around cultural and linguistic competence that have been identified and well known for decades, and that are civil rights issues, and they're frankly liability reducers, right? For any kind of system or organization. It just improves everything. We've discussed in the Alliance Coalition that with some of the options for people that might be coming to recertify annually, what's going to happen after the pandemic? Will everybody have to go ahead and line up again, or if they don't and they can do things on the telephone, are there enough bilingual staff? So language access is a continuum, which includes hire also, right? Hiring practices that foster bilingual, culturally competent staff and are supplemented by community trained, or at least community sensitive interpreters who also have competencies in their field. So I do think that we very much see the interpreter as a professional. I think that there's national standards in medical interpretation that have been known for a while, and and that's true in any field. But there's still that feeling that you get that people will say we want to do it, but then the budget makes it prohibitive, right? And it's just not valued as a professional requirement, right, for delivery of services. So I think there's a dollars and a mindset issue, that
I agree.
We really need to address, and we'll be happy to support in that. And Rodrigo, I don't know if there's something else that I feel like I cut you off in my long.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
It's very much in line, and I think as essential. And speaking to a ward that is very diverse and not only linguistically, but also culturally diverse. Like language has to be the base where we can all feel comfortable to communicate. So I want to jump now to another one of your main platforms, Councilmember, which is and your support for initiatives such as the NEAR Act, and also the approach of a public health lens to public safety. So we're just very interested in seeing how La Clinica can collaborate with you on that approach and see how we can be work together in this vision. So what is your approach and your vision for a public health approach to public safety?
Yeah. So, a public health approach to public safety starts with recognizing that a lot of the issues we're seeing are the outcome of economic desperation, substance abuse, people being cut off from support services, failures in rehabilitation, and other deep inequities that have been made worse by the pandemic. And so in order to address the public safety issues, we have to holistically address their many roots by investing dollars, time, energy, staffing, and in safe housing, right? Good jobs, education, opportunities for our young people, social services, violence interruption, mental health support, and all the other needs that our communities have. A person who makes the decision to pick up a gun has already been failed by our system 100 times. And it takes coordination and the agencies and also with community groups and nonprofits like La Clinica who are closer to the ground and understand these issues better than anyone. And we also must be cautious, not to over rely on broken systems that really exacerbate the issues people face by criminalizing them and putting them through the carceral system. So, evidence shows us that these approaches do not ultimately help prevent violence that has been devastating to our community. So it's really important for these programs to be inclusive of all of our communities. And so that starts with eliminating barriers to services, right? It also starts with the way we use our funding. And it also starts with having some real serious conversations about, implicit bias, colorism, which, exists both in the Black community and the Latino, Latina, Latinx community, and needs to be addressed for us to overcome a lot of the prejudice that we see. And one more thing to keep in mind is also that representation matters, right? Sort of to the point we just talked about in our offices and who we have and who we representative. We can't make all these investments in the world, but if these programs don't reflect the diversity of our communities, they won't be effective and they won't reach the people that need to be reached. And so at the end of the day, we need to remember that the issues we face in our communities are interconnected. And so that is what a public safety approach looks like. When we talk about our office, here's a lot of complaints about loitering, right? Loitering. But most people don't realize that the reason people congregate in front of buildings and things is a lack of affordable housing. They often don't have space to go. We see a lot of issues with substance abuse in recent months, but we often neglect to understand that many of our neighbors turn to these substances because they can't access mental health services needs. So, we need culturally competent, language accessible, comprehensive approaches to resolve the issues and move the needle on community safety. And that is what a public health approach to public safety looks like.
Thank you, Councilmember. And it's true, because if public health is the collective efforts of a society to create the conditions in which all people can be healthy, it is very important to come with that concept. And the issue that we face sometimes, even engaging with our own communities, when we speak of public safety, we associate it with security and surveillance, which is
Yeah.
not necessarily the model that we want to replicate. And you mentioned language access, ensuring mental health services are the best steps to move away from these concepts of feeling secure from and building collective security. So I don't know, Catalina, if you have some examples where La Clinica has been involved in.
Well, I was just thinking about the concept of safety, and how during the pandemic we've really sort of reclaimed, what safe means. I mean, I've thought of public safety as a term that we always associate with the concerns around order and police. And during this pandemic, we've understood, safe to mean something entirely different. Both because of the issue of COVID and social distancing, but also safety from police violence, right? Safety as an essential worker. Even the concept of being essential. I keep wondering, and I keep saying, like, how long are we going to be essential? And that's that reclaiming of we're essential beyond the needs of the economy in a pandemic. We're essential because of our human rights, and the concept of public safety is really being around safe spaces that we create versus safety for others, right? Like a safety from others. And La Clinica's model has been a clinical community health model since the beginning. I think mostly because we always could only provide a drop in the bucket of health care, and we've understood that prevention and primary prevention and community health promotion were really one of the ways in which we could reach a much larger number of people in our community that we wouldn't be able to serve in our doors just because of our tiny services. And then even now, right, because of the need that outstrips our overall capacity. But safe spaces are pretty core to our strategies for community health. So beyond outreach with trusted peer educators, we also have safe spaces, such as in our Mount Pleasant location, the Community Health Action Center is designed with the concept that safe space is also a public health intervention. So I'm interested in how we're can reclaim the concept of what public safety is, and for us, as public safety belongs to us. It's not something that has to hurt us if we approach it from that mindset. And I was also just thinking how the public health approach really requires an infrastructure that doesn't go away, right? Like the language access proposals that you're discussing about having people that can do monitoring and vigilance and reporting, right? This is also a public health approach to surveillance, right? And when those systems that conduct monitoring and vigilance go away, then we aren't able to detect diseases. We aren't able to detect abuses, right? We aren't able to respond appropriately to those first signs that things are not working, right? So I think that we need to push not only for funding that's for short periods of time, right? Or for like initiatives that last a year or two, but to really bake them into our understanding of what's required to maintain safety, right? Like once things are okay, we back off, they're going to go back, right? And so this concept of a healthy city and what it's really going to take as a long-term investment, I'm just reflecting on the things I've heard you say, and I'm wondering how the community engagement process is going for you in such a multilingual ward. Rodrigo reflected how challenging it has been for us to use these mediums and make them accessible linguistically. And I think it's our dream that we can be together with other monolingual communities and communicate directly with each other, because that is where real organizing, real power gets developed. How's it going for you?
Yeah, so we've come up with what we use some of our campaign almost strategy tactics and brought them into our office. We have a very diverse staff, and I'm very proud of the diverse staff we have. And so we are able to utilize that. And what we've been doing is really, there's nothing that beats on the ground work, right? So what we have and what we're rolling out also is sort of a street team concept where we have individuals, we're going to have individuals going out, collecting. One of the things we heard is collecting information, collecting emails, right? Knowing there's a digital divide, but also making sure all of our residents have our newsletter, and then making sure that we have what's necessary for our newsletter to be provided in multiple languages. So collecting data around who needs the letter to be in different languages and who needs the letter to be printed out, right? So if our newsletter is an email, usually that's the form. There are individuals who don't have Wi-Fi internet, right? And so until we bridge that gap, our method has been to print the newsletter out and provide it to those individuals, right? So the goal is there's a digital divide, a language divide, and sometimes an age divide. So we have a number of seniors who don't have access to internet or who may not be, outside to do that. So what we're asking neighbors to do is identify the seniors on your block, the seniors in your apartment building, and then connecting us to them, right? So that way we can get them the services they need. There's no other way to break the barriers, but to meet people where they are. So we go to grocery stores, right? We were in front of Safeway last Sunday, getting people signed up for the vaccine. We had some of our volunteers who were Amharic speaking and Spanish speaking with us to communicate, but also to make people feel comfortable asking questions about the vaccine and vaccine access. There's just really no other way to do that, but to find ways to meet people where they are. And that's the way we've decided to use that. And then finding ways to bridge those gaps. So if we find someone who doesn't have access to internet, how do we get them access to internet, right? How do we get them that process? But until they do that, we will gladly print you out a newsletter of information. We will gladly print it out to you in a different language. We will gladly do what we need to do to stand in the gap between those language, age, and gaps that we are seeing, and digital gaps that we're seeing with our community.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think that.
Can I say one thing, Rodrigo? Just because we're in the subject, is one thing that I want to reflect on is that Zoom has actually been a really interesting tool for us to be able to facilitate that communication with simultaneous interpreters, because it does have that feature where you can have interpreters interpret in both language, really truly invisible, right, from the rest of the team. And we've had several decades of using simultaneous interpreters with their equipment. And to me, it's always wonderful when someone who is an English speaker has that experience of not being the dominant language and feeling that they don't understand and having to wait for the interpretation. I mean, I think that goes a long way to building understanding. But our board of directors is 51% patients. As an FQHC, we're required to do that. And so all of our board meetings have this interpretation. And we had the challenge of having them in Zoom that comes from being in a Zoom meeting for 2 hours, with really kind of boring board business. But the communication has been really facilitated by people being able to speak freely, not just listen, but speak freely, right, in their language of choice. And I think there's some things there that we can take into this next phase that could really help us.
Yeah, I would
build those bridges, like not just this way, but this way.
Yeah, I would love to see. I mean, my hope is that the council will take on some of these practices.
Yeah.
In the past, I accept, even though I wasn't on the council, I accept the criticisms of, we need to make that something a part of our council meetings, make it a part of our hearings, and even all of our roundtables. And so we've been, I think within our office struggling to figure out ways that we can do that, and we always have room to do better. And we hear the same from our deaf, hard of hearing community, right, about having caption videos. We get that criticism. And so I think it only makes us better to get better with our access in every way. And so I know we're committed to doing that that I know the barriers have been like funding reasons. And once again, your money has to speak to what you believe in. So if we need interpreters on the line for our hearings, we have to make that happen, right? Because we have to prioritize it. It can't be an afterthought. It has to be a forethought. So what does that look like? And I'm hopeful that we'll take some of the practices we've learned during COVID and put that into our hearing, because that means we're opening the doors of access to our government in a way that we haven't before. Yeah.
Well, that'll be exciting. I think we'll be hearing a lot more from our clients and community. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember. And it is very encouraging to tie a lot of the topics that we've been discussing, like a public health approach to public safety includes mental health services. It includes facilitating linguistically accessible spaces, includes meeting people where they are. So we move away from those concepts of surveillance and being secure from, but actually building collective security. And that's a bit of the silver lining, as both of you were mentioning, that maybe COVID has pushed. Going in that line, what is your perspective about the pandemic response and a future post-COVID, not only in Ward 4, but the broader district? And once again, how can La Clinica play a role in that vision?
Yeah, I think, I'm one of the things that we saw during COVID is, Ward 4 had one of the highest rate of COVID cases in DC, a trend that, persisted early on during the pandemic. And one of the things that should have happened from the very beginning is we should have been pay people to stay home, right? And so there were a lot of socioeconomic factors that played a role in driving up cases in our ward. And we have a lot of working class residents who, when the pandemic began, didn't have the option to stay home and social distance. And they had to go to work, putting themselves at risk day in and day out, right? And we also, have a lot of dense housing in Ward 4, right? Apartment buildings, shared homes, where it's not easy for families to socially distance. And so, one of the things that, we wanted to make sure is that when we look at COVID, moving forward, what are some of the ways that we prevent this, this from happening? One of the things, standpoint, having paid leave and having paid family leave, we, when we talk about tenants' rights, when we talk about worker wages, we talk about paid family leave, that's a part of this, right? You have to have a right to safe, dignified housing, a good job where workers are respected, and access to paid sick leave and paid family leave for people and during this time. And so we have to make sure our laws are strong when it relates to our tenant rights, our workers' rights, and our leave and our ability to have leave, right? The other piece of that I think, is important, if I already talked about really getting your help as it relates to expanding DC Healthcare Alliance to mental health services, the issues I brought up about language access, right? Giving that legislation the teeth it needs by funding workers in Office of Human Rights, and also by doing the overhaul. And the other piece that I talked about was the legal services. And, as someone who served as the attorney for the Attorney General, I'm a strong supporter of expanding DC's immigration legal services so that families have the assistance that they need moving forward. And so I think, you provide such vital services to our community. That has said, having laws on the books isn't the only part of the equation. It doesn't mean anything if we don't do the hard work to educate our community about these protections and support them when they want to stand up for their rights and apply for these programs. And so I think we need to work extra hard as a city to reach the residents who are having access as barriers. Elected officials like myself need to both inform the community about their rights, but also back them up with strong enforcement and investments. And we talk about being a sanctuary city, but what does that mean if our residents are still afraid or can't access legal aid or wages? And so beyond the vital services you provide, it's getting help with educating the community about the rights and programs that they can make a difference in their lives and community. I also need the support of La Clinica and community groups across Ward 4 to let me and my team know when someone is having their rights violated or if there are problems with accessing programs. Last month, we met tenants in Brightwood who had every issue you can imagine in their apartment, threats of eviction, mold, safety issues, internet. And they weren't having any luck hearing back from their landlord. So, we're getting involved and contacting landlord from our office and other relevant agencies. So to summarize, yes, we have these rights, but it takes solidarity and the community coming together and collective action to make them real. And so it's about making the laws stronger, but it's also about making the laws known. And then it's also about making the issues known to community advocates and servants like myself. And that's all of the areas that we need your help and your support on.
Thank you. Catalina, no sé.
Well, I kept saying that we didn't want to go back to the way things were. We wanted to go forward, and I think at the very beginning, I don't know, I got excited and I thought that was a done deal. But, I think everything is, it will require struggle, right? And there are lots of interests, right, at play for keeping things the same. But I agree, right, that it's, I think, one of the main and most moving things that have occurred this year is really the organizing, the movement for racial justice, the outpouring over the murder of George Floyd, and everything that has come around the realization, right, or maybe just that moment where we are, where change happened because of organizing. Even organizations like ourselves, La Clínica del Pueblo, we're healthcare providers. We're community providers. It's really our patients and our clients that need to be healthy, safe, and empowered to be able to do that on their own behalf. And we hope that can be part of La Clínica's contribution, right, in a person's journey. But we're very clear that that's an important role for us to play, but it's really our clients, our community, linking them to their own, and to raise their issues with us, right, as well, as parts of a system that can and should improve. So it's the processes that we're setting in place, right? Like it's the change is happening because of not just the actions for new programs, but because of the way in which we do the work. And I'm hoping that we can hold on to that, hoping that we can hold on to that.
Thank you. So we have some space for some question and answers. We have some questions in the chat. I believe this is coming from to the council member. So what community approaches are feasible at this point to address increases in intimate partner violence, domestic violence in Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrant communities, particularly with reduced police due to the complexities with ICE and need for safe spaces for people of color?
It's I think, that last piece, right? Creating safe spaces, right? One of the community approaches that we've seen that have been helpful is that a lot of individuals who have been victim of intimate partner violence or domestic violence often felt they did not have anywhere else to go, right? And we're naturally afraid. And so I think, one of the ways we've seen community members step up is to provide safe spaces for community members. And so I think that's one of the community approaches we can take, is creating safe housing space for victims of domestic violence, and some shared group housing spaces that make people feel protected, or people who understand what is happening and what is going on, right? And so it's really a lot of what we are seeing with mutual aid, right? Our Ward 4 mutual aid has done an amazing job, and I know a number of Ward 4 mutual aids across the city. But mutual aid is really about taking care of each other from a community standpoint. How can I help you and support you in what you're going through? And so I think one of that's safe housing, communal housing is one way. I think also, some community approaches that work to that is also having open forums, open abilities for individuals to talk to other survivors of domestic violence to let them know that they can make it through this, that they can get through this, and not only offering the therapy, the mental health services, supports that they need to be able to come out of that victimization, and go through the therapy that's necessary to make that happen. So I think that's really some of the ways that the community can come together, and we can come together to support those who have been victims of domestic violence and partner violence here in the district.
You, Councilmember. I don't know, Catalina, would you like to speak of the experience of La Clinica?
Yes, I mean, maybe just to add that La Clinica has a gender and health initiative within our community health promotion program that has been working with women who have experienced intimate partner violence in their past or present for, has it been almost 20 years? I feel like Entre Amigas is an old program, but the core elements of that initiative that really include promotoras de salud, community health workers who are themselves the navigators and the supporters of other women in the community. They have been working all of this time during the pandemic through Zoom. I think that's been one of the most incredible things that I've seen is how the networks have done everything they've needed to be able to learn the technology, go Zoom, go through the instructions of Zoom word by word, Spanish by Spanish, so that they could stay connected and continue providing that support that has been sometimes lifeline, right, for people who are isolated. Even, they've brought things to our attention, even around things that we've sent to people's homes, the whole sending things to people's home, which has been a dominant way of us being able to stay in touch or serve people while they're at home. Has problems if you're in a situation where you're not safe at home. So I don't feel that we've had any less work. I feel that we've had to change the way in which we are able to be effective. And Rodrigo's closer to this, so please feel free to add, because it hasn't just been in that program, but.
Absolutely, but I do want to give our audience members also on our Zoom, which, speaking of the challenges of language access, are not necessarily visible in the Facebook or the social media because it's being hosted on Zoom. So we have two questions on the Zoom chat. The first one comes from Dora, who asks, since Latinos are one of the most affected by COVID, mental health can also increase a lot. Is there any percentage of funds that could be given to health clinics to help us with anxiety, depression, etc.? And then we have another question from the Zoom chat as well, from Nadia, which asks, what strategies could the system adopt so that the population has equitable access to both physical and mental health? So I don't know, Catalina, council member, who wants to take on the first one?
I think the short answer is yes, there's enough funding to do that. And then I'll let Catalina take it.
Well, I think this system of care that we have that doesn't provide health access to everyone, but has these different fragmented systems is one of the main barriers. But locally in the district, we have put in funds for a local health insurance program for anybody who lives in the district, which is the DC Healthcare Alliance, and increasing that benefit so that it includes mental health services would be one of the most direct ways to increase access to mental health services and funding for clinics that provide mental health services now, which is unreimbursed. I think that mental health services themselves are not the only things that contribute to mental health and wellness, right? So there's in the same way that we know that physical health doesn't get produced by everything that's in the four walls, mental health as well, right? Cannot just be addressed by access to therapists. So, we're very much of the belief that we have to live in a city that's healthy with affordable housing, with safety and ability to develop and prosper as a human being with yourself and your family, to be able to really get at that health. So those investments to eradicate poverty, to increase equity, and those indicators that we were talking about, are we actually achieving that? I think those are going to be fundamental for really addressing the problem systemically for further down. I haven't been talking slowly. I apologize for our wonderful interpreters. I know I'm going to hear at the end. how poorly I did.
So any additional council member in terms of strategies, particularly I think as a publicly funded system, engagement, I don't know of any strategies that we can relay to our audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree that, I believe that the best approach is for the funding to go through to direct service providers like La Clinica, who have a great relationship already with community members, who built the trust, who built years of community trust, to be able to give those services. And when we look at health and wellness, it's not just therapy, right? It's the ability to have access to, doing exercising, right? To yoga, to, healthy practices. The other piece of that is also healthy eating, right? What we eat contributes to our health and wellness as well. And so providing also food services, things of that, those things are all come together. When we talk about health and wellness, it's not just mind, but it's body and spirit and soul too. So how do we bring all of those things together as an access point and a space for individuals to be able to receive services? And so when we talk about funding that, I'm talking about a robust mental health spectrum that focuses on all those areas and can provide services in all those areas when connecting them to service providers like La Clinica.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. And we have about 2 minutes left, so wonder if you have any closing words, council member Catalina. Catalina, and then I'll get council member, you can go.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, and it's such thank you for being an advocate for language access in particular. We know you to be an advocate for social justice and health and public health. And, La Clinica has one of the oldest community medical interpretation programs in the city, and language access is a very clear social determinant of health for us. So it's very heartening to see you integrate language access within the overall approach to producing health in our city. And we look forward to working with you, and for you to challenge us, for us to challenge you, and more than anything, to be able to connect you with our community who deserves an advocate like you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And for the work, I want to thank Clinica for the work that you all do for our community and have done for so many years for our community. And it's really through partnerships with your organization that we're able to reach our community and in a deep way. And yet, like you said, I hope you will continue to hold not only me accountable, all of our elected officials accountable, to really challenge them on what that word equity means and what it really means for us to provide services to all of our communities. I am proud for Ward 4 to have such an amazing, robust immigrant community. And to be proud of it is not enough, but to show it by continuing to be inclusive in all of the ways is what I'm committed to doing. And so continue to bring, your issues to our office in any way that we can help. We will show up and help, and we will do the work through our policy, our legislation, our funding, and our constituent services to bring services to our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Council Member Catalina. Thank you, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Ciao.